There's a special kind of vulnerability that comes with being home alone. Your sanctuary becomes a potential trap. Every sound is amplified. Every shadow holds possibility. And sometimes, the fear isn't irrational. Sometimes, you really aren't alone. What you're about to hear are 5 documented accounts from people who thought they were safe in their own homes, only to discover that their walls and locks meant nothing to what was waiting for them. These stories have been verified through police reports, security footage, and 911 recordings. They're real, they happened, and they could happen to you. The first story comes from 23-year-old Emma Rodriguez, who was house-sitting for her parents in suburban Phoenix, Arizona in August 2019. Emma's parents had gone on a 2-week cruise, and Emma, who lived in an apartment across town, jumped at the chance to stay in the spacious house she'd grown up in. The neighborhood was quiet, safe, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew all their neighbors. Emma felt completely secure. On her 3rd night alone in the house, Emma was watching television in the living room around 10 p.m. when she heard a sound from upstairs, a thump, like something heavy had been dropped. She muted the TV and listened. Nothing. Just the house settling, she told herself. Old houses make noise. But then she heard it again. This time it sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking across the floor of the upstairs hallway. Emma's heart started racing. She grabbed her phone and pulled up the security app her father had installed. The house had cameras covering the front door, back door, and garage. She checked each feed. Nothing. No one had entered the house. The doors were all closed and locked, but the footsteps continued, walking back and forth in the hallway above her head. Emma considered calling the police but felt foolish. What would she say? She heard footsteps, but the cameras showed no break-in. They'd think she was paranoid. Instead, she grabbed a kitchen knife and slowly climbed the stairs. The hallway was dark. Emma flicked on the light and her breath caught in her throat. Every door that had been closed when she went downstairs was now open. Her parents' bedroom, the guest room, the bathroom, the linen closet, all standing open. Emma knew she'd close them. She always closed doors, a habit from childhood. She checked each room carefully, knife held in trembling hands. Empty. Every room was empty. No one was there. No windows were open. No signs of intrusion. Emma closed all the doors again, making sure each one latched. She went back downstairs and tried to focus on the TV, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. An hour later, she heard it again, the footsteps, and when she checked the security app, she saw something that made her blood freeze. The camera covering the upstairs hallway, which her father had installed just months ago for extra security, it was showing movement. The recording clearly displayed the hallway, and there, visible on her phone screen, was a shadow, moving along the wall. A human-shaped shadow walking back and forth, cast by a figure the camera couldn't capture. The shadow had a head, shoulders, arms. It moved with the gait of someone pacing, but there was nothing casting it. The hallway on camera was empty, except for that impossible shadow walking its length over and over. Emma called 911. She was barely coherent, crying, telling them someone was in her house but wasn't visible, that she could see their shadow but not them. The operator tried to calm her down, said police were on the way, told her to leave the house immediately. Emma ran out the front door and waited in her car in the driveway. When police arrived 10 minutes later, they searched the house thoroughly. Every room, every closet, the attic, the basement. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No evidence anyone had been inside. But when they reviewed the security footage with Emma, they went silent. The shadow was there, clear as day on the recording, walking back and forth in an empty hallway. One of the officers, a veteran named Martinez, took Emma aside and asked if anyone had died in the house recently. Emma said no. The house had been in her family for 15 years and no one had ever died there. Officer Martinez nodded slowly and said that didn't matter sometimes. Sometimes shadows came from somewhere else, somewhere that overlapped with our world just enough to cast a shadow through. Emma's parents came home early from their cruise. Emma had called them hysterical, and they booked the first flight back. When her father reviewed the security footage, he made a discovery that chilled the entire family. He went back through weeks of recordings, checking the upstairs hallway camera at night, and he found it. The shadow had been there for months. Every single night between midnight and 3 a.m., that human-shaped shadow walked back and forth in their hallway. They'd been living with it for months without knowing, sleeping while something invisible paced outside their bedroom doors. Emma's father called in paranormal investigators, priests, anyone who might have answers. Most found no explanation. But one investigator, a woman who'd studied shadow phenomena for 20 years, told them something that made them decide to sell the house. She said shadows without sources are called projected entities. They're not ghosts in the traditional sense. They're impressions from parallel locations. Sometimes a person in another version of the house, in another dimension or timeline, is walking around, and their shadow bleeds through into our reality. The investigator said it's harmless mostly. The entity isn't aware of us, and we shouldn't be aware of them. But sometimes, if you acknowledge the shadow, if you interact with it or show that you can see it, it becomes aware of you. And when that happens, the barrier between its reality and yours weakens. Eventually, you might stop seeing just the shadow. You might see the thing casting it. And according to this investigator, people who've seen what cast those shadows, they don't sleep well afterward. They don't feel safe in any house ever again. Emma's family sold the house within 3 months. The new owners have never reported anything unusual. But Emma knows the shadow is still there, still pacing that hallway every night, still walking its route in whatever parallel space it inhabits. And she knows she was lucky. Lucky that she ran. Lucky that she didn't stay and watch that shadow until it became something more. Something that could watch her back. The second story takes place in a rural farmhouse in Iowa, where 31-year-old Michael Torres was staying alone for a week, while his wife visited family in California. Michael worked from home as a software developer, so being alone for a week was actually welcomed. Quiet, productive, time to focus. The farmhouse was isolated, sitting on 20 acres with no neighbors visible from any window. On his 4th night alone, Michael was working late in his home office, debugging code, when he heard a knock at the front door. He checked his phone. It was 11:30 p.m. Who would be at his door this late? He walked to the front door and called out, asking who was there. No response. Just silence. He turned on the porch light and looked through the peephole. No one was there. Michael went back to his office. 5 minutes later, another knock, this time from the back door. Michael felt a flutter of unease. His property was large and fenced. You couldn't just walk from the front door to the back without going through the gate, which was locked. He grabbed a flashlight and went to the back door. He shone the light through the window, illuminating the back porch and yard. Empty. No one there. No vehicles. No footprints in the soft dirt around the porch. Michael checked that the door was locked and returned to his office. Over the next hour, the knocking continued. Front door, back door, side door, the door to the garage. Always when he was back in his office. Always stopping the moment he approached. Never any sign of who was knocking. Michael called the county sheriff, explained the situation. A deputy arrived 40 minutes later, which was actually fast response time for such a rural area. The deputy, a young man named Collins, took the report seriously. He walked the perimeter of the house with Michael, checking for signs of trespassers. They found nothing, no footprints, no evidence anyone had been on the property. Deputy Collins said he'd do a wider sweep of the area, check the access road. Michael thanked him and went back inside, feeling slightly foolish. But the moment the deputy's car disappeared down the long driveway, the knocking started again. And this time, it was different. It wasn't stopping when Michael approached the doors. It continued, persistent, demanding, getting louder. Michael called Deputy Collins, who turned around and came back. This time, as they both stood in the living room, they heard it. A loud, forceful knock at the front door. Deputy Collins approached with his hand on his weapon. He threw open the door suddenly, trying to catch whoever was there. Nothing. Empty porch, empty yard. But the knocking didn't stop. It moved to the side door, then the back door. Collins and Michael ran from door to door, opening each one the moment the knocking came. Always nothing. Always empty space beyond the threshold. Collins radioed for backup, and another deputy arrived. The three of them stood in the living room, hearing knocks move around the house, circling, one door after another, like something was walking around the perimeter, knocking as it passed each entrance, testing each door to see if it would open. Then it stopped. Complete silence. The three men stood frozen, listening, and that's when they heard a new sound. Footsteps on the roof. Heavy footsteps walking across the roof directly above them. Slow, deliberate steps, moving from one end of the house to the other. Deputy Collins drew his weapon and went outside, shining his flashlight on the roof. Nothing visible, but they could still hear the footsteps inside the house. Michael had an idea. He pulled up the app for his home security system and checked the motion sensors. Every single sensor in the house was triggering. Motion detected in the living room where they stood. Motion in the kitchen, in the bedrooms, in the hallways. The entire house was registering movement in every room simultaneously, as if dozens of invisible people were walking through every space at once. The deputies decided Michael should leave the house for the night. They drove him to a hotel in the nearest town and promised to monitor the property. But here's what Michael found out the next day, when he returned with his wife, cutting her trip short. The deputies had stayed on his property until dawn, sitting in their patrol car, watching the house, and they documented what they saw. Between midnight and 5 a.m., every light in the house turned on and off repeatedly, not flickering, deliberately switching on and off in patterns. The doors they'd locked opened and closed. They could hear it from outside, the distinctive sound of doors opening and closing over and over, and the motion sensors recorded continuous activity all night long, figures moving through every room. But the security cameras showed nothing. Just empty rooms with lights going on and off and doors swinging open and closed by themselves. Michael contacted paranormal investigators who had equipment beyond standard security systems. They spent 3 nights in the house and captured audio that police had missed. When they amplified the sounds from that night, they discovered that beneath the knocking was something else. Voices. Multiple voices speaking in what sounded like reversed speech. When they played the audio backwards, The words became clear. Dozens of voices all saying the same thing. Let us in. We're so cold. Let us in. We used to live here. Let us in. The investigators researched the property's history and found something Michael hadn't known. In 1952, the original farmhouse on that property had burned down with a family of 8 inside. They'd all died. The house Michael lived in had been built on the exact same foundation in 1955, and apparently the family that died was still trying to come home, still knocking on doors that led to a house that no longer existed, still walking through rooms that had burned away 70 years ago. Michael and his wife moved out. They couldn't stay knowing that every night a dead family tried to enter their home, tried to return to a place that was theirs before it was taken by fire. The house has stood empty for 3 years now. Real estate agents can't sell it. Every potential buyer who stays overnight leaves before morning. Some report the knocking. Others report voices. One couple reported waking to find handprints on the walls. Small handprints. Children's hands. Dozens of them. Covering every wall in the bedroom. As if invisible children had pressed their hands against every surface, trying to prove they were there. Trying to show that this was their home first, and they weren't going to let strangers have it without a fight. The third story comes from Seattle, Washington, where 19-year-old college student Amber Chen was living alone in her first apartment. It was a studio in an older building, affordable because the area wasn't great and the building had a reputation for high turnover. Tenants never stayed long, but Amber needed cheap rent and wasn't superstitious. On her second week living there, Amber woke at 3 a.m. to her bedroom being ice cold despite it being July. She could see her breath. She sat up in bed, confused, and that's when she noticed her closet door was open. She knew she'd closed it before bed. She always closed it. Something about that closet made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't explain why. Amber got up to close the door and froze. There was something in the closet, a dark shape, darker than the surrounding shadows, and it was moving. Amber hit the light switch. The overhead light came on and the closet appeared empty. Normal clothes hanging on the rod, boxes on the shelf, nothing unusual. But Amber's eyes went to the back wall of the closet. There was something written there. Words scratched into the paint. She stepped closer and read. It watches from inside the walls. Don't let it see you sleep. The handwriting was frantic, carved deep into the drywall. How had she not noticed this before? Amber had looked in this closet dozens of times when unpacking. These words hadn't been there, or had they? She couldn't remember. The cold in the room was making it hard to think clearly. Amber grabbed her phone and took a picture of the writing. She was going to show the landlord in the morning, demand to know what this was about. But when she looked at the photo on her phone, the words weren't there. The picture showed the back of the closet clearly, but the wall was blank. Unblemished white paint. No scratched message. Amber looked back at the physical wall. The words were still there. She could touch them, feel the grooves carved into the surface, but they didn't appear in photographs. She tried several more times, different angles, with flash and without. Every photo showed a blank wall, but the message remained visible to her naked eyes. Amber didn't sleep the rest of that night. She kept her lights on and her back to the wall, watching the closet. At dawn, she called her landlord and asked about previous tenants in her unit. The landlord was evasive at first, but Amber pressed, said she'd found something disturbing and needed to know. Finally, the landlord admitted the truth. The studio had a history. Over the past 8 years, 5 different tenants had broken their leases early. All of them reported the same things: feeling watched, extreme cold at night, and most disturbing, they'd wake up to find themselves in different positions than they'd fallen asleep in. One woman said she'd wake up standing in front of the open closet with no memory of getting out of bed. Another said she'd wake up to find all her furniture rearranged, heavy furniture she couldn't have moved herself. And all of them reported messages appearing and disappearing, warnings scratched into walls, written on mirrors, left on steamed bathroom glass. Always about something watching, always about the walls. Amber asked if anyone had died in the apartment. The landlord said no, not in the unit, but in the walls between her unit and the neighbouring one. Construction workers had found something during renovations 5 years ago: the skeleton of a man, sealed behind the drywall, no identification, no missing person report that matched. He'd been there for at least 20 years based on the condition of the remains. Police investigated, but couldn't determine who he was or how he'd gotten there. The prevailing theory was that he'd been a homeless person who'd broken into the building during construction, got trapped in the wall space, and died. His body had been sealed in when the walls were finished. The skeleton was removed, the wall was repaired, but ever since then, tenants in both adjacent units reported being watched, reported feeling a presence in the walls, reported messages warning them about something that lived in the spaces between. Amber decided she couldn't stay. She broke her lease and moved out within a week. But before she left, she did something that still gives her nightmares to remember. On her last night, she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing scratching sounds coming from inside her closet wall, soft but persistent, like fingernails on drywall, like something trying to claw its way out. Amber got out of bed, approached the closet, and pressed her ear against the back wall. The scratching stopped. In the silence, she heard breathing, not her own, coming from inside the wall, slow, raspy breathing, and then a voice, faint, muffled, but clear enough to understand. It said, "I see you. I see you in here with me. Soon you'll be in the walls too." Amber ran, left most of her possessions and never went back. She paid the lease-breaking fee and moved in with friends. But here's what haunts her. 3 months after she moved out, she received a package. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed her apartment, her old closet, and the back wall. In the photograph, scratched deep into the paint, was a new message. Amber was here. She escaped. You might not. According to the landlord, a new tenant moved into that studio. A young man. He lasted 2 nights. On the 3rd night, neighbors called police because they heard screaming. When police broke into the unit, they found it empty. The young man was gone. His belongings were still there. His phone, his wallet, his keys. But he had vanished. Search of the building found nothing. And here's the detail that made police seal the apartment. When they examined the closet, they found fresh scratches on the back wall, deep gouges that went through the paint and drywall into the wooden studs beneath. And in those scratches, if you looked at them from the right angle, they formed words. "I'm in the walls now, help me." The apartment has been vacant for 2 years. The landlord can't rent it, won't rent it. The building manager says they're planning to gut the unit, tear out all the walls, rebuild from scratch. But Amber knows that won't help, because whatever is in those walls, whatever watched her and breathed behind the drywall and wrote messages that existed in some spaces but not others, it isn't confined to one apartment. It's in the walls throughout the building, moving through the empty spaces between units, watching everyone who lives there. And occasionally, When it finds someone vulnerable, someone alone, someone it wants, it reaches out, it makes contact, and if you respond, if you acknowledge it, if you let it know that you can hear it breathing and scratching and speaking from its prison in the walls, then you become part of its collection. Another voice trapped in the darkness between walls. Another person who existed once in the world of light and space, but now exists only in the narrow, suffocating gaps where human beings were never meant to go. The fourth story involves a family home in Austin, Texas, where 16-year-old Jason Park was alone for the weekend while his parents attended a wedding out of state. Jason was a responsible kid. His parents trusted him, and he was looking forward to a quiet weekend gaming and ordering pizza. On Friday night around midnight, Jason was in his bedroom when he heard his mother's voice calling him from downstairs. "Jason, can you come help me with something?" Clear as day. His mother's voice. Jason was confused. His parents weren't supposed to be back until Sunday. He called out, asking if they'd come home early. No response. He went to the top of the stairs and looked down. All the lights were off on the first floor. He called again. "Mom, are you home?" This time he heard his father's voice. "Jason, come down here, we need to talk to you." But something about the voice was wrong. It had his father's tone, but sounded hollow, echoey, like it was coming from far away even though it seemed to originate from the living room. Jason's instinct screamed at him not to go downstairs. He pulled out his phone and called his mother. She answered after 3 rings, sounding happy and slightly drunk from the wedding reception. Jason could hear music and voices in the background. "Mom, are you and Dad at the wedding?" His mother laughed. "Of course we are. Is everything okay at home?" Jason lied and said yes, everything was fine. He just wanted to check in. He hung up and stood at the top of the stairs, his heart pounding. Both his parents were 2 states away at a wedding. So who had called his name in their voices? As if in answer, he heard his mother's voice again, this time from his parents' bedroom. "Jason, I'm in here. Come talk to me." Then his father's voice from the kitchen. "Son, get down here now." Jason locked himself in his room and called 911. He told them someone was in his house, mimicking his parents' voices, calling to him from different rooms. The operator took him seriously and dispatched police immediately. Jason stayed on the line with the operator, listening to the voices continue calling him. His mother, his father. Sometimes both at once from different locations. The operator tried to keep him calm, told him police were 3 minutes away. Then Jason heard a new voice, his own voice, coming from the hallway outside his locked bedroom door. "Why won't you come out? They need you. We all need you. Come out, Jason. Open the door." It was his voice perfectly replicated, speaking words he wasn't saying, asking him to unlock the door. Police arrived and searched the house thoroughly. No one was there. No signs of forced entry. The house was empty and secure. But Jason refused to stay there alone. He called his older sister who lived across town, and she came to get him. He stayed at her place for the weekend. When his parents came home and heard what happened, his father did something Jason didn't know he was capable of. He researched. His father, a practical engineer who didn't believe in the supernatural, spent hours looking into the history of their house and interviewing former neighbors. And he found something that explained everything and made them consider moving. 20 years ago, before Jason's family bought the house, a family named the Carvers had lived there. Mother, father, and teenage son. The son, Dylan Carver, had struggled with severe mental illness. One night, Dylan had a complete psychotic break. He killed his parents while they slept and then took his own life. The murders were discovered 3 days later when Dylan didn't show up for school. Police reports indicated that during his psychotic episode, Dylan had been talking to himself, mimicking voices of his parents and his own voice, having conversations with imaginary people. Neighbors reported hearing multiple voices from the house the night of the murders, though only Dylan was alive at that point. It was as if his fractured mind had created multiple versions of his family to speak to as he killed the real ones. Jason's father learned something else. 4 families had owned the house between the Carvers and Jason's family. All of them had teenage children, and all of them had moved out within a year. Jason's father contacted them. 3 of the 4 families agreed to talk. They all reported the same phenomenon. Their teenage children heard voices mimicking family members calling them from various rooms. The voices were most active when the teenager was home alone. And in each case, the voices tried to lure the teenager to specific locations in the house. One girl reported that the voice mimicking her father tried to get her to go into the basement. When she refused and later checked, she found that the basement stairs had rotted and the top 3 steps would have collapsed under her weight. She would have fallen 12 feet onto a concrete floor. Another boy said the voice mimicking his mother kept trying to get him to check the garage. He eventually did, and found a gas leak that had been slowly filling the enclosed space. If he'd gone in there with the garage door closed and flipped a light switch, the spark could have caused an explosion. The voices weren't just mimicking the families. They were trying to hurt the teenagers, trying to lure them into dangerous situations. And Jason's father realized that on the night Jason was alone, when the voices were calling him, what were they trying to make him do? Come downstairs in the dark where he might trip and fall. Go to his parents' room where the balcony door had been left unlocked and open. A fall from the 2nd floor waiting. The voices weren't random. They had intention. They had malice. Jason's father believes that Dylan Carver's final moments, his fractured mind creating those phantom voices, somehow imprinted on the house. That the psychotic break was so powerful, so traumatic, that it left an echo that recreates itself when conditions are right. When a teenager is alone, when a family mirrors the structure of the Carvers, when the house can replay the events leading up to that terrible night. Jason's family still lives in that house. They couldn't afford to move. But Jason is never alone there anymore. His parents make sure someone is always home when he is, and they've installed cameras and sensors throughout. Jason watches those feeds obsessively on his phone. And sometimes, late at night, the sensors detect audio in empty rooms. When Jason plays back those recordings, he hears whispers. His mother's voice, his father's voice, his own voice, all whispering the same thing. Come out, come down, we need you. The voices haven't stopped. They've just learned to be quieter. And Jason knows that the moment he's alone again, they'll start calling louder, trying once more to lure him into the dark, trying to make him the next victim in a cycle of violence that refuses to end. The 5th and final story connects all these accounts because it involves someone who experienced something that combined elements from every story you've heard. In November 2023, 28-year-old nurse Rebecca Walsh was house-sitting for an elderly couple in Portland, Oregon, while they visited family for Thanksgiving. The house was beautiful, spacious, in a nice neighborhood. Rebecca had her own room and felt perfectly safe. On her second night there, she woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of knocking. Front door. She got up, checked the peephole. No one there. The knocking moved to the back door. She looked out the kitchen window. Empty yard. Then she heard footsteps upstairs. She was staying in a first-floor bedroom. There was no one else in the house. She grabbed her phone and the homeowner's cordless phone and armed herself with a kitchen knife. Rebecca called 911 and crept upstairs. Every door in the hallway was open. She'd closed them all before bed. She checked each room. Empty. She went back downstairs and sat in the living room with all the lights on, talking to the 911 dispatcher. Police arrived and searched, found nothing. But they stayed for an hour, taking her statement seriously. After they left, Rebecca tried to sleep but couldn't. She sat up watching TV until dawn. The next day, exhausted, she decided to leave. She'd call the homeowners, apologize, but she couldn't stay another night. As she was packing, she went into the guest bathroom to collect her toiletries, and that's when she saw it. Written in the steam on the mirror, even though no one had showered. "Don't leave. We need you to stay." Rebecca screamed and ran out of the bathroom. She grabbed her bags and headed for the front door, but the door wouldn't open. The deadbolt was locked, but her key wouldn't turn it. She tried the back door. Same thing. All the doors in the house had locked, and her keys wouldn't work. Rebecca called 911 again, hysterical. She was trapped inside the house. The operator told her to break a window. Rebecca found a chair and smashed the living room window. She climbed through, cutting her arm on the glass, and ran to her car. She drove away and never went back. The homeowners returned from their trip to find their house intact, except for the broken window. But when they reviewed their security camera footage, trying to understand what had happened, they found something that made them call the police and a priest. The footage showed Rebecca's 2 nights in the house from multiple camera angles. And what the cameras captured was impossible. They showed Rebecca moving through the house normally, but they also showed shadows with no sources. Doors opening and closing on their own. And most disturbing, they showed a figure. Translucent, barely visible, but there, following Rebecca from room to room. Standing behind her when she sat on the couch, standing at the foot of her bed when she slept. The figure appeared human but wrong. Its proportions were off. Arms too long, head too large. It moved in stuttering motions like frames were missing from its existence. And in the footage from her final morning, when Rebecca discovered the message on the mirror, the cameras showed the figure standing directly behind her, close enough to touch, its hand raised toward her head as if about to stroke her hair. The homeowners had never experienced anything unusual in 20 years of living there. But after Rebecca's incident, things changed. They started hearing the knocking, the footsteps. They'd find doors open that they'd closed, and they began seeing the figure themselves. Not often, just glimpses, a shadow in their peripheral vision, a shape standing in the corner of a dark room. It was as if Rebecca's fear, her acknowledgement of the phenomena, had made it stronger, had made it more real. The homeowners consulted with paranormal investigators who had equipment to measure electromagnetic fields and temperature variations. The readings throughout the house were off the charts, and when they conducted an EVP session, asking questions and recording for responses, they captured something chilling. A voice, neither male nor female, responded to their questions. When asked what it wanted, the voice said, "Lonely, so lonely. Need someone. Need them to stay. Everyone leaves." When asked who it was, the voice said, "Many. We are many, trapped here. Can't leave. Want them to stay. Want them to be like us." The investigators believe the house, or more specifically, the land is built on, contains multiple trapped entities. spirits or consciousness or energy patterns, the terminology doesn't matter. What matters is they're trapped and desperate for company. And when someone is alone in that space, when someone is vulnerable and afraid, these entities become active. They try everything to make that person stay, knocking to get attention, moving things to confuse, mimicking voices to lure, appearing to frighten. Their methods seem contradictory, but they're trying anything to create a connection, to make the living person engage with them, because engagement means acknowledgement, and acknowledgement means possibility, the possibility that they can pull someone else into their trapped state, add another consciousness to their lonely collection. Rebecca Walsh still has nightmares. She's in therapy, dealing with PTSD from those 2 nights. She won't house sit anymore, won't stay alone in any unfamiliar place. And she's part of an online support group now, a community of people who've had similar experiences, people who were alone in houses and encountered something that shouldn't exist. They share their stories. They validate each other's experiences, and they've noticed something disturbing. The number of reports is increasing. More and more people experiencing phenomena like footsteps, knocking, shadow figures, mimicked voices. It's as if whatever these entities are, they're getting stronger, more active, more desperate, or perhaps the barriers between their existence and ours are thinning. Perhaps we're all starting to perceive what's always been there but was invisible to our limited senses. These are 5 disturbing true stories from people who were home alone. And the lesson from all of them is this: your home is only as safe as the history it contains. The walls that shelter you might also hide things between them. The rooms that feel familiar might be occupied by something that's been there longer than you. The sounds you dismiss as the house settling might be something testing to see if you'll acknowledge it. When you're alone, truly alone, that's when these things become active. That's when they try to reach out. That's when they see if you're vulnerable enough to engage with them. So if you find yourself home alone and you hear footsteps where no one stands, or knocking with no one at the door, or voices that mimic people you know, or shadows that shouldn't exist, remember these stories. Remember that acknowledging might make it stronger, that engaging might trap you, that responding might make you part of whatever existence these entities occupy. The safest thing you can do is leave, get out, go somewhere else, because once you've seen them, once you've heard them, once you've acknowledged that they're there, they'll never forget you, and your home will never feel safe again.